Hello and welcome back to our channel. It's Lois here from Lois and Morgana Davidson Art, and today I'm going to be showing you how I painted this beautiful summer scene. It's a scene from the South Downs with a patchwork of hills in the background. The first thing I do, as always, is to sketch out the position of my main elements. So here I've got the hills, the direction of some of the fields in the background, and the tree just sketched out very, very loosely on the right. You can pause the video here and maybe take a screenshot of the sketch if you want to study it a little bit more detail. I'm going to be using the wet in wet method to paint today. I'm using Saunders Waterford cold pressed watercolour paper, and it's taped to my board with ordinary decorator's masking tape, and my board's at an angle of about 20 degrees so the paint will flow nicely on the page. The first thing I'm doing is using clean water to wet my sky and my land. I'm leaving the areas that I want to stay as unpainted white clouds dry, and then I can paint around the clouds to produce my sky. The large wash brush I'm using is a Princeton Aqua Elite 1.5 inch mottler, but any large brush will do. This is very light value raw sienna, just to start off the sky. It'll give me a little bit of a glow to the sky, and it'll hardly show, but it'll just lift that blue a bit. This is cerulean blue mixed with a bit of ultramarine blue. You can see I'm just working into the damp paper, starting at the top. The blue's a lot brighter and richer at the top, and it becomes a bit paler as the paint runs out on my brush. I'm using horizontal brush strokes, mostly the tip of the brush, feathering it out around the edges of these clouds, trying to keep the cloud edges nice and soft for one of those sort of wispy skies. Just working a little bit to keep those edges nice and soft, wanting it much paler down on the horizon line. Now I've mixed my sky colour with a bit of sap green to make a slightly sort of blued out green, and I'm starting to paint in the distant hills. And I've dipped into some raw sienna as well, so I'm putting in just the suggestion of these different fields in the distance. Everything's just softly diffusing as it begins to dry. I've now dipped into really rich sap green with a bit of the sky colour. Also, I've dipped into some of the raw sienna as well. And I've created foreground grasses, and now I'm just sweeping the brush across horizontally to create the distant field just in front of my tree line. This is sap green and perylene green, and I'm painting very, very loosely my trees, following my pencil roadmap, dipping into some darker green here and there just to sort of put in some shadows. This is a small calligraphy brush, but any small round brush with a good point will do. And I'm just dotting in to break up some of those edges of those canopies with a few dots and dashes here and there, sort of dancing calligraphic brushwork. Back to the mottler and using the corner of the brush to put in these nice dark shadows. This is my size 5 or number 5 palette knife. I'm just going to scrape through the rich paint with the palette knife to reveal the white paper underneath, and this will just give me a bit of a guide for my tree trunks and branches. Some of that will get covered up when I paint the trunks in later, but drawing them in now through this rich paint just helps to add a bit of sort of variety and looseness to the painting. And I've decided that I need to add a few more trees over on the left just to balance things up, so I'm going to paint these in exactly the same way. So after adding a little bit more paint to my foreground, a few darks and a little bit of yellow from transparent yellow, I'm now going to sprinkle a little bit of ordinary fine ground table salt into the foreground. I've laid my board flat now because I don't need the paint to run anymore, and I'll just sprinkle a tiny amount of salt into the damp foreground, which is now almost dry, so hopefully I should get some pretty little effects as each salt grain pushes aside the paint and gives me like a tiny flower shape. And I'll show you what you can do if you find that your paint is a little bit too wet and you're not really getting any kind of little salt blooms. First of all, I'm just scraping through the paint to produce a few sort of grass stems and things like that. And then what I'm going to do is give the foreground a very quick blast with a medium heat, low to medium heat of my hairdryer. What this will do is it will control the salt so that the effects don't kind of explode out and spoil the picture. You can control salt effects like this with a warm hairdryer, and it can be really useful. I'm now going to leave everything to dry completely. While it's drying, that just gives me time to promote or plug my book, Landscapes in Watercolour, Techniques and Tutorials for the Complete Beginner. If you're enjoying this demo, then you may be interested in my book. There are a couple of links in the description below. Follow those if you'd like to take a look in more detail. So it's all dry, and I'm using a clean dry brush just to brush off any salt crystals that haven't dissolved. And you can see I've got some really pretty effects in the foreground that are just suggesting wildflowers, grasses, brambles, that sort of thing. I'm now going to use my rigger brush and a nice dark mixture made with sepia and Payne's grey and paint in some stronger, darker tree trunks and branches. And I just want to add a bit of detail onto the hedges around the field boundaries in the distance. So I've mixed up some sap green with some ultramarine blue, a nice light value, and using the tips of this fine round brush, I'm just going to be painting in those field boundaries, following the pencil lines that I can still faintly see through the paint. I can also put a few marks on top of the distant hill just to give the hint of some bushes and trees growing in the far distance. And I think it's quite interesting that the dry brush mark on the left below that smaller group of trees really does suggest a stone wall or something like that in front of the tree, and that's why I've left it there rather than covering it over. If little happy accidents, as Bob Ross would say, like that happen during your painting, then it's really good to be confident enough to leave those, even if they are unplanned effects, because that sometimes is the beauty of watercolour, and you have these little things that happen that are really nice to include in the final painting. So I'm going to remove the tape and see how the painting looks with its clean white border, and see if I need to do anything else to it. This helps us to see the painting with fresh eyes. It looks more finished with a white border, and this can help us to see where we need to make a few little changes if necessary. So stepping back and having a look at the painting with a fairly sort of critical eye, but constructively critical, I've decided that there's a few of the marks on the canopies of the trees are looking a little bit hard-edged. So I'm going to break up those edges a little, just create a few dots and dashes and soften a few edges here and there, just to make it look a little bit like tiny leaves just straying out from that dark shadowed clump of leaves there, just softening things back. And by making those edges a little bit more ragged and more broken, I think it helps the painting as a whole to look a bit more effective. I'm quite happy with that. I think these slightly more ragged edges work better in this loose painting. So here's the finished painting, and I hope you enjoyed this demonstration, and I hope it'll give you a few ideas for painting similar scenes loosely and sort of keeping it nice and fresh and nice and simple. If you enjoyed the video, then please give us a thumbs up, and if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, then please do so. It's free to do, and it really does help us with our reach. And thank you so much to everybody that supports us on Patreon. And if you're interested in supporting the channel, then please follow the links below to our Patreon pages. Many thanks again. I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.